children losing their homes and heritage, we think of war zones, governments and conflict. But what if I were to tell you that us living our everyday lives is affecting children and their families in this same way? Contributing to climate change is impacting some of our most vulnerable communities. Climate change is robbing our children's future.
Under the sunlight that shines on our coastlines, a looming catastrophe awaits to seal the lives of our future generations. We invite you to join us to explore the stark reality through diverse perspectives of concerned parents and alerting scientists. Raw truths and conflicting voices are confronted as we address this crisis that's reshaping our world.
Let's take a look at the carbon cycle. Carbon dioxide is a gas in the air released from cars, factories and natural processes like volcanoes. Plants take in carbon dioxide to use in photosynthesis and then store the carbon. Both plants and animals release carbon back into the atmosphere when they breathe and when they die and decompose. Our oceans absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and again marine plants perform photosynthesis, storing the carbon. Over long periods, carbon becomes trapped in fossil fuels, which is released back into the atmosphere when burned. Although essential for life, the problem is we are releasing more carbon into the atmosphere than we are storing. The carbon in the atmosphere acts as a thermal blanket, trapping the sun's rays and heating up the planet. Our team conducted a worldwide survey including the general public of people aged between 17 and 65, people with and without children, to find out their views on sea level rise. Their responses indicated that sea level rise is reported on a monthly basis and that it was not an issue for them and their families to worry about, although the threat did impact their decision to have children. Most people agree that sea level rise is an issue for their country and a global issue in general.
Here today at the Indian Ocean Marine Research Centre, ready to interview one of our scientists.
We interviewed Dr. Arnold van Rooyen and Dr. Mick O'Leary to see what the experts think on sea level rise.
What do you believe are the most significant impacts of sea level rise today?
Well, there's lots of impacts. I guess the most significant impact will be that which will occur to small island nations.
The increased risk of coastal flooding in combination with increased risk of erosion would be the key things that I work on and I think are quite pressing for many places around the world.
Do you think that there are issues bigger than the sea level rise problem?
It's hard to say if they're bigger or not. There's definitely really pressing issues with pollution many places around the world and loss of biodiversity. It's the perspective you have. I do think the loss of biodiversity is probably a very critical one that's affecting so many things of our life and our environments.
Probably not. Ocean warming and coral bleaching could have major impacts to communities that rely on those ecosystems for food resources and tourism and things like that. In terms of the impacts to the ocean environment, certainly sea level rise is probably the most impactful.
What's one thing that you could wish upon the public to understand about sea level rise? What would it be?
I think we need to understand that sea level rise is a given. We've easily locked in half a metre of sea level rise towards into the next century, and that would be probably a minimum value. There is potential for sea level rise to be much higher than that. Based on the research I've done looking at the geological past, I think sea level rise is probably the most destructive, both in a social, environmental context and in an economic value context as well. So we should be very concerned.
How would you appeal to parents to educate the younger generation about sea level rise?
Yeah, so I think it's important not to be too negative about it, and that you should be honest to your children, I think, and explain that this is happening and it is something we are working at trying to solve as a global community.
Well, it's their future. We're talking about not in the distant future, but in the near future.
But aside from using less fossil fuels, what other solutions do you think are possible?
So I think with anything you buy, you can take an informed decision and see how it's made and what sort of process goes behind producing these goods or services. So I think if you really want to be conscious about this, then really look at
What do you think that members of the public can do now to help the issue?
We need to do everything we can to mitigate CO2 emissions, and that would mean supporting renewable projects.
So I think overall, I guess carbon emissions is the key one, making sure that we reduce those as much as possible so we can have more sustainable energy sources, and then indirectly through, I guess, their politicians and their representatives, making sure that this is something they really care about and that that's sort of fed into governments and decision makers as well.
As we conclude our journey through the rising tides, remember, our choices today shape the future of our planet. Rising sea levels threaten our communities and ecosystems. The disparity between the general public's opinion and scientists' research is clear. It's time to act, speak up, advocate for change, and work together to protect our world for future generations. Educate the younger generation. Do your part to use less energy and encourage local governments in the use of renewable energy sources. Together, we can create a wave of change.